Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you.
And that voice that you can hear, guys, is Mr. Matt Eastley. Oh, and by the way, welcome to Book Corner Extra Time. What we do on the Current View, we look at a book every month and then we hook up with the author of that book. And this month it is Matt Eastley, who's written a fantastic book about one of the all-time great commentators and presenters, Mr. Brian Moore, and how he saved our Sundays. Before we get into how you got hold of the title and what you're doing now, talk to us about who Matt Eastley is.
Who's Matt Eastley? God, that's a big question, Paul. You just asked me there. Who's Matt Eastley? Well, I was born in the greatest year of the 20th century, 1966. I'm a World Cup baby. Also a huge Beatles fan, and that was the best year for the Beatles, I think. So grew up on the borders of Kent and southeast London. There's only one club you can really follow, in my view, if you're born where I'm born, and that's Charlton Athletic. So Charlton Athletic fan from a very, very early age. Trained journalist, writer, author, broadcaster. Written a number of books, actually, Paul. Written a series of books about the FA Cup through the eyes of fans that were there. I did all the cup finals in the 60s, 70s and 80s, so it involved tracing lots of fans who were at those games. And it was actually called When the FA Cup Really Mattered, because I think I felt quite strongly that the FA Cup had lost its glamour. I know we still get that thing, and I'm very close to Maidstone United, actually, so I'm just talking to you after, Maidstone United probably disproved that theory about the FA Cup. So I've written a number of books, but I'm all, really interested in that kind of sweet spot of my childhood, 70s, 80s, the great players, the days of kind of 3-4 channels, pre-internet, pre-Premier League, really. Just that so many of us seem to hark back. And I've just written a series, my books have usually been in of that ilk, really, Paul, except for the one I wrote about 1966 World Cup final, where I traced loads of people who went to that game. It's called 66 on 66, which was, thoroughly enjoyable. I didn't go down the usual route of interviewing players. I went for kind of fans, photographers, police officers, members of the band who were there on the day. And so that's kind of really, I guess, if I've got a kind of USP, if you like, it's trawling that kind of period, 60s, 70s, 80s for personal memories, really, of football matches and just kind of growing up and nostalgia, I guess, really.
That ticks every
box.
That's
kind of who I am.
That ticks every box for me, because that's pretty much who I am. When I say a 70s book or a 60s book, 80s and 90s, before the Premier League, it really gets my juices going. I'm not a great lover of the modern game. I watch it. We do the Current View with Terry Curran, but it's very retro as well. We do always look back. We have a Legends Lounge. I'm really interested in those FA Cup books. We have featured them on the Current View before. What other books?
Have you?
We have.
Have you featured them?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, there was one about the 70s, wasn't there? There was one the 60s, one the 70s, one the If It's the series that I'm thinking of.
So the 60s was called From Barry Stobart to Neil Young. The 70s was called From who was it? Oh God, Ronnie Radford to Roger Osborne.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you've done them, have you?
Yeah,
oh,
we've
I'm
covered.
Flattered. I'm flattered.
And we've previously done a book corner with my football books, but Andy sadly doesn't do it any longer. But we made 15 podcasts, and your books cropped up quite often in our talking of football books.
Well, I'm chuffed that they're finding an audience of people who appreciate them, and because I sometimes think you're ploughing a bit of a lone furrow, Paul. You think is there the people as nerdy as me who's obsessed with this? I guess I'm obsessed by the minutiae of it as well, and I kind of really want to research the life out of these subjects. But I like to go for a slightly left field view, and the other thing I do is I always talk to people who were there, if possible, to fans who were at the games. Or I've done the same thing with this book about Brian Moore. I should add, actually, Paul, why it's very much about Brian Moore, and Brian Moore's sons and family are so supportive. It is looking at the whole spectrum of regional televised football in the 70s. So I look at every single region: Anglia, Yorkshire, Tyne Tees, Central, ATV as it was. You know, in your case, being a Brummie, you know, Hugh John's son has been wonderful to me and continues to be. So I've had buy-in from all these people that have told me first-hand accounts of what it was like to work on the big match, or Star Soccer as it was in the Midlands, and people like Martin Tyler, Jerry Harrison, Gerald Simstad I was very lucky to speak to before he sadly passed away. But so I've really spoken to a lot of key people. As I say, in the course of the time, Paul, a few people sadly have died, because it's been a project quite long in the making, really.
How long has it taken you to make it?
Well, I mean, the actual idea came about 10 years ago, because one of the things I should have said is actually I'm a big supporter of non-league football. So while Charlton Athletics is my side, my sort of non-league side is Tunbridge Angels in the National South. And I've been following them a lot. And you might know that Martin Tyler is quite heavily involved in kind of non-league football. He's basically been assistant manager. And I got talking to him once when he was came down to Tunbridge. And just through that, I was very interested about his time on LWT and the big match. And I did a series in Back Pass magazine.
Got you.
Looking at every region. Brilliant. And so I covered every single region and during that. And so really this book is a kind of a kind of culmination of all that work, but very much a kind of fresh approach to it. And so, but that's going back about 10 years. So it's been kind of 10 years in the sort of making, but really I didn't really start working on it in earnest until about 2 years ago, and kind of brought it all together, because all the interviews that I did and all the information, it takes so much time to research, and I'm probably guilty of over researching this, if you like, if you can over research. And so if you can picture, I'm like wallowing knee deep in Rothman's football yearbooks and looking at old stuff on YouTube, and you know, going through every season of every regional television, thinking about the great highlights, the great characters. People like Stan Bowles, of course, who've just died. You know, was growing up watching the big match. Players like Stan Bowles were really kind of big for me. You know, I wasn't a QPR fan, but he was a player that kind of the big match really brought to life. And players like Trevor Brooking and Charlie George at Arsenal. So it's been sad in a way, it's been very sad writing this, because so many of those great players are no longer with us, but you know, so many more are. But so there's sadness mixed in with the pleasure of revisiting all this time, really, Paul, I guess.
So why and how was the focus on Brian Moore? And also as well, you've got that was the regionalised stuff was on ITV, but we had in the August of 1964, the year of my birth, Phil Chisnell of Liverpool kicked off Match of the Day.
Of course,
on
absolutely.
BBC Two. So we had the BBC and we had ITV, but we had great commentary, and it was very similar in the format. But how did the formats differ for the different regions? Because like on the with the big match in the London area, they seem to have more players in the studio talking about the game. We didn't have that at Star Soccer.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Paul, it's a very good point you make about the kind of the big match. And when the big match in 1964, the match of the day when it started in 1964, when the big match and all the LWT, all the ITV franchises were redistributed in the late 60s, LWT decided they wanted to do everything that the big match didn't. They wanted to really, really modernise televised football. So they brought in much kind of younger producers, directors. Bob Gardam is a name that people should know, but Bob Gardam was really the director that produced the blueprint for the way football is televised today. He did all these things like close-ups of players, interesting angles. The way football was produced by LWT in the big match was absolutely revolutionary. More tabloid, if you like, than the kind of BBC. In terms of what was different, I mean, for a start, LWT was by far the biggest region and by far had most money. Yeah. Now, LWT, because it was based in the capital, I think, and it was able to throw more resources, but that didn't always sit comfortably with every region. Certainly a region like Granada with the with Gerald Sinstad, but really the key character in Granada was a gentleman called Paul Doherty, son of Peter Doherty, the former Manchester City player, who was the producer
Legend.
director. Absolutely.
Oh, geez,
But
what a player he
Granada,
was.
absolutely. But Granada resented, I think, LWT's domination. So they really, really worked hard with something like Kickoff and Kickoff Match, which was the region there. In answer to your question, yeah, much lower budget in the Midlands. I've spoken at great length to Gary Newborn and Hugh John's son, Mark, Trevor East, people like that. People told me. So it was a much... It wasn't, from what I can remember, pretty certainly it wasn't a studio based. It was done from the ground. It was a piece to camera, interviews done at the ground, much, much lower production value. So LWT, yeah, had the kind of money and the resources, yes. And the thing is, Paul, this is very important, the fact that it was a Sunday afternoon programme gave the regions a lot more time than BBC did to craft a show and bring in those regional highlights and have things like studio guests. Jimmy Hill's analysis in 1968 was also revolutionary for its time. So that kind of in-studio analysis was all new. And there were various attempts to emulate. Of course, Jimmy Greaves came to Star Soccer in 1980, but LWT was very much the leader. That said, there were some excellent football programs being produced around the network, and it was this unique Sunday spot that it had, which I think sits so comfortably with so many of us, and so many people associate Sunday football with Sunday roast, for instance, Sunday roast dinner, or coming back from the pub, watching the game, or because it was Sundays in the 70s in Britain were pretty boring, really. I mean, I had to go to church, which I write about in a book, actually. It's not about me, but there's a demonstration of how bland most Sundays were. And then you had this great explosion of television, these great soundtracks after all sitting down to lunch. And you have these great players like Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington. Who do you support, Sir Paul, by the way?
I am a Birmingham City supporter for my sins.
I write a lot about Birmingham City in there. Bob Hatton, Trevor Francis, Bob Latchford, all these great players. I mean, that Birmingham side was fantastic. You know, that kind of, with that brilliant kind of blue with the white sort of big block down it, and Latchford when he first came on. And yeah, I've forgotten what a great player Bob Hatton was, actually. Some of his goals that were on Star Soccer were absolute quality. So, you know, these Sunday programmes brought these players to life. You know, they made stars locally. You hear things like in Yorkshire or Tyne-Tees, like Hull City players like Chilton and Wagstaff, who became stars locally because regional television made them stars. And I think you got that from Tyne-Tees, players like Malcolm McDonald and John Tudor, or Billy Hughes at Sunderland, Middlesbrough with Alan Fogg, players John Hickton, players like that, you know, became stars in their own right because of regional televised football. And of course we grew to love our own commentators, Hugh Johns, I mean, absolutely fantastic commentator, Gerald Sinstad, Martin Tyler and Keith Macklin in Yorkshire, Jerry Harrison. You know, they trip off the tongue, and people remember these players. I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but you can probably tell I'm a bit passionate about this subject. So so if you're trying to get a word in edgeways there, Paul, please do ask me another question.
I love people that are passionate. You're that passionate, you've written books. My job is just to metaphorically hold a microphone and you just do all the talking.
Well, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't want to hog the mic, but I'll talk all day about it. You can probably imagine. It was an absolute labour of love, and I've got to say, the buy-in I've had from people like Martin Tyler, Jim Rosenthal, been fantastic with their time. Jerry Harrison in Anglia, fantastic. And as I was able to build the trust of people within the industry, people opened up their contacts book to me and said, yeah, this is his number, this is his number. So I was able to get right to the heart of these programs, talk to people who were involved in them, both, you know, on screen, in the production team behind it, or on the mic, which has been an absolute pleasure. And to hear stories like Jerry Harrison telling me about broadcasting from Chelmsford City in the FA Cup in 1973 against Ipswich, or or Norwich. Players perched in Norwich City. You had to perch right behind the goal in the early days, and just these little quirks of their patch used to go round, and the little ways that each region worked. Gary Newborn, it's got some great stories. Absolute pleasure. And so and I do tell a little bit about the kind of the history, if you like, of televised football. You mentioned 1964 and the year Match of the Day launched. It was a huge opposition to televised football, and people forget how strong it was. The football authorities were absolutely terrified of televised football because they thought it would kill the game. They thought it would stop people coming through the turnstiles, not really understanding the power of television to popularise football and to actually make people want to go. And I'm sure you were the same. I went and watched a game of football. Didn't stop me watching it. In fact, you'd make sure you watched it the next day.
Yeah.
You go to a game, you say, because I remember that bit. Oh yeah, I remember that bit happening in the game. I remember that happening in the game. But the television, the football authorities, particularly Alan Hardaker, were dead set against football. And the region that really pioneered televised football was Anglia. They were the ones that kind of really spearheaded it, and the others kind of followed. Anglia TV, when Sir Alf Ramsey was at Ipswich Town in the early 60s, Anglia TV managed to get an agreement with Ipswich Town to televise a few games, and somehow the FA relented, and that was kind of the genie was out of the bottle at that stage. There had been sporadic, occasional games before that. Obviously, you had the cup final and some international games, but league football was not really televised at all. I mean, there are exceptions, but it was Anglia that really kind of opened the door. And I think the late 60s was kind of the right time for it. Colour TV, just before colour TV. That's another big thing. Colour TV was massive in televised football. So all these things were coming together. England winning the World Cup in '66, again, was an elevation of the popularity. Colour TV coming in the late 60s, and this new kind of breed of younger journalists and TV executives who kind of made these great programs. So it was all coming together, Paul, and that's where programs like The Big Match came from. But going back to what you said about Brian Moore, the reason it's called Brian Moore Saved My Sunday, or Saved Our Sundays, is because growing up in Kent, London borders, where I did, we had The Big Match. That was it. So we had The Big Match. That was our main match. We got our main match from Arsenal, West Ham, Tottenham, Chelsea, Palace. If we were lucky, they come down to Charlton, the Valley once a season. But that was our bread and butter. And Brian Moore, for me, was the face and voice of my Sunday. And I loved Brian Moore as a figure. He was one of those people that, to me, said that everything was well with the world. What I didn't know, and I've learned subsequently from his sons, that Brian was a great worrier. Right. He was a great worrier. He used to worry about everything. He used to worry about, he was notorious for getting to grounds early because he was absolutely terrified he'd be late. And I don't think Simon or Chris or his sons I've got to know very, very well would mind me saying he was a great worrier. But he didn't show it. He was an absolute consummate professional. And I really liked him because it's a bit of a cliche, but he was like your favourite uncle or your favourite teacher at school. He had that kind of warmth about him that just said everything was well with the world. And I think he was also a fantastic commentator, and he was a fantastic presenter, and he was a fantastic journalist. And those three things are skills which everyone thinks they can do, but they're really, really hard, and he made it look easy. But he was brilliant, and he was the voice of I've got a few voices of my childhood, but he's definitely right up there as one of them. And then, of course, we'd get another match, and then if we're lucky, we get Hugh Johns coming from St Andrews or Villa Park or Highfield Road, Filbert Street, whatever. And then and it was always this. What's the next game going to be? Where is it going to be? Are we going to get Jerry Harrison? Are we going to get Kenneth Wolstenholme up in Tyne Tees? Are we going to get Keith Macklin? Are we going to get Gerald Sinstead? Are we going to get Roger Malone down in HTV doing Bristol City or Bristol Rovers? Are we going to get Martin Tyler in doing a Southampton or Portsmouth game. So it was always that kind of sense of jeopardy, if you like, that where are we going to go? What's, it's, and as a kid, I mean, that to me was just so exciting. But I also, Paul, think it's a little bit more than just pure football. And again, for me, it's a little bit, and this is where it gets a little bit more conceptual. It's about kind of nostalgia and family. Sundays being with the family. Not everyone had great childhoods, I accept that, but for me it was about Sunday roast, and it was a safety. It takes me, and I think this is why it holds a special place in so many of our hearts, that Sundays of our childhood were kind of a safe place. I feel so anyway, and it's time spent with family and football. To me, I think Sunday, because Matt Lorenzo, the Sky bloke, says every time he hears Brian Moore's voice, he can taste roast beef. So people kind of link the two together. Do you know what I mean? They link Sunday lunchtime football with being with the family and having their roast dinner. And I think there's a different time. I think perhaps people did have spent time with the family more. And I think it's that kind of these old programs sort of get near the sweet spot of our childhood and our upbringing, and all these things are mixed in together: food, family, Bob Latchford, Bob Hatton, you know what I mean? Theme tunes, the great theme tunes of called The Young Scene, which was the original Big Match one, and then it was taken over by possibly the most famous one. There was one called Cheeky Bird in between, but La Soirée, which is the famous that one, which everybody knows as well as the Big Match. And you must have had one on Star Soccer as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The Star Soccer one. I mean, Match of the Day was Barry Stoller's, wasn't it, on the ball?
Barry Stoller, yeah. Before that, it was, and that was sparked by ITV having considerably better theme tunes, because I think the original was something called Drum Majorette, the original Match of the Day, and they changed it in 71, the Match of the Day, because with Stoller's fantastic. Is it onside or offside? It's on onside, isn't it?
I think it's onside.
Onside, yeah. It's either onside or offside, isn't it?
It's one or the other. We don't know what on and offside is these days, so I mean, how can we remember the 70s?
Yeah, no, precisely. But everyone knows that it was a fantastic theme tune. But that was in response to the brilliant theme tunes that were being used by the ITV networks, because ITV, in everything, in its imagery, in its titles, its opening credits, its music, the way the programs were put together was so much more sharper, dynamic, and modern than Match of the Day. Going back to the original question, it was actually written by a couple of German guys, called, I think, Varder and Konrad Wolf and Varder, I think, Wolf and Baden, but under a pseudonym of a single guy's name, called David Ordini. So it wasn't because that threw me. It's credited to David Ordini, but that was actually a pseudonym for two German band leaders. So they wrote that great Big Match theme tune. And of course, the famous Bob Stokoe canter onto the pitch after the 73 FA Cup final, we going to embrace Jim Montgomery, is cited by people in the TV industry as one of the greatest bits of football direction ever. Yes. And the commentator and director working in harmony to understand what was going to happen. So Gardam, as the director, held that shot at the end of the 73 final because he thought Stokoe was going to do something interesting, and he did, and he ran onto the pitch and embraced Montgomery. I understand BBC actually missed that, but that was Gardam's intuition as a great director. Of course, they were the images that accompanied that great theme tune. So all these things added up to quite a potent mix. It was quite a special program, and I mean, this book is really a celebration of all that, Paul, to be honest.
Now, in the central area, it was ATV Today back in those days, and it was Billy Wright.
Yeah.
Who was the anchorman? Gary Newbon
was.
Gary Newbon was just coming into it, but it was the great Billy Wright. And one of my customers actually own the house that Billy Wright used to stay in when he
Oh,
come up from
fantastic.
London to do Star Soccer. And I
Oh,
remember,
that's great, isn't it?
yeah, Trevor East, he
Yep.
used to do a thing like with the dancing footballers in the Midlands area as well, and they would put that to music.
Yeah.
I remember Alan Hudson, because I do a load of podcasts with Alan, and Huddy
Yeah.
said Gary Newbon did something in the way he moves, the Shirley Bassey, to Alan Hudson, the way that, when he was playing at Stoke.
Fantastic.
And we did
Yes.
in the
Yes.
Midlands, it seemed to be, it was either Blues or Villa or Albion, and then we had a couple of games away from home, which would be Blues, Villa, or Albion. So it seemed to be
Yes.
really centralised with Derby County, Stoke City, Nottingham Forest. So it was always one of our teams away and a team that was at home. And I think the format was always 3 games. But again, it probably was a lot different. But when you look at the amount of characters that we had in those days, it
Mm.
was almost like the perfect storm. I'm not sure it would happen today like it did then, as you alluded to, making stars of some players that you wouldn't necessarily see.
Exactly, like your Chilton and Wagstaff, but they're,
Absolutely, yeah.
players like Tony Curry at Sheffield United.
What
But
a
but you like,
player.
well, I mean, superb, yeah. But I mean, also again, your Bob Hattons, people like that,
Mm,
people at Coventry a bit later in the decade, like Ian Wallace and Ian Ferguson,
yes,
and
yeah.
I mean, of course, what a great period it was for the Midlands as well.
Yeah.
Derby and for Star Soccer, Derby winning the title in '72 and '75. Birmingham, great season, getting promotion, and that really good side. Villa, of course, went on to win the title. That was in. By the way, this is being done in 2 or 3 volumes. So my first
Right.
volume actually only takes us up to 75. So because there's so much information, so I've done season by season every region. I've tried to cover as many clubs as I can, and it's rammed with names of players and many who I'd forgotten actually. But it's been a joy just to kind of watch these players. I'm thinking now of Birmingham, the likes of Pendry and Calderwood and Roger Hind. These kind of players that I hadn't forgotten about, but it's great to see them again, and just to remind you keep going back to Bob Hatton. I saw Bob Hatton score 2 or 3 goals. He just took brilliantly, and sometimes Hatton was overshadowed by Latchford and Francis. But what a
Definitely.
player he was, And that's the joy of something like this. And I think these regional programs made, as you say, Paul, made stars of these players, the flamboyant players like your Georges and your Bowles and all this, and that lead side, love them or loathe them, of the 70s, the early 70s, Yorkshire TV made massive stars out of those players. That's the Clark, Bremners, Lorimers, Giles, all that team, and they were great for Yorkshire TV. And Keith Macklin, who not so many people remember Keith Macklin, but he was a very, very good commentator up till 1976 when Martin Tyler got the Yorkshire gig. But Macklin was the commentator for the first 8 years, really, with Fred Dinage, the great Fred Dinage. There's another good Brummie for you.
Portsmouth fan, isn't he?
Portsmouth fan, but he's from Birmingham. I think he's from Sutton Coldfield, isn't he, or something like
Okay.
that. So he was the presenter, and of course Danny Blanchflower was the first commentator for Yorkshire TV in '68.
Right.
So all these things that come out of the woodwork, if you like, and I've had it's been great to see. There's some great stories as well. Dogs on pictures, floodlights going out, the orange ball coming out, and special guests, the Christmas specials that the big match used to do, when you'd have people like Elton John, or you'd get people like Terry Venables, Rodney Marsh, presenting the show, Kevin Keegan, and Christmas specials and the fun spots. It sounds a bit like we're talking about the dance, fun spots where they'd play, they'd speed up some film and put some silly music over it. All the things that the BBC wouldn't do.
Yes.
And the ITV kind of wallowed in that unashamedly, but BBC wouldn't do it, but we're going to do it because.
Tired of ads interfering with your favorite sports podcasts? Good news. Ad-free listening is available on Amazon Music for all the music plus top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay ahead of the game by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/sports ad free. That's amazon.com/sports ad free to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
We think our viewers will love it. And that was very much and let's not forget, Paul, there was a lot of snobbery around. A lot of people, there's a lot of families that didn't watch ITV. They were seen it as, sort of a bit of a middle class thing, I think. But, oh no, we don't watch that. We watch the BBC, we watch the Match of the Day. And ITV were having to contend with that. And BBC kind of, there was a famous punch-up after the '69 Cup final between Leicester and Man City, because that was all about the kind of TV companies, the BBC and ITV, wanting first sort of interview rights with the winners after the game. And that ended up with a big punch-up in the tunnel. So the rivalry between BBC would definitely, their noses were put out of joint by ITV, and these frankly quite excellent programs, these televised football programs that they devised. So the book's about that, but I go back to Brian Moore is front of house for me, because he was my kind of icon, and the book finishes with a lot of tributes to Brian, who died far too young and cruelly just after he'd really hung up the mic. But he was a good man. I never met him, but I met his family, and I've never heard anyone say a bad word about Brian Moore. And I think I was pretty certain early on he was going to be kind of on the title of the book, because he represents to me Sunday football. He also represents a very, very good side to football, the side that we love. There's a sort of common decency about Brian Moore. A sense of right and wrong, which kind of appealed to me as I was writing this, because football gets a bad rep, but he represented all the good stuff to me, and that's kind of why I wanted him on the front of the book, really.
And On the Ball with Brian Moore as well. They had that program on the Saturday, didn't they? Which was the equivalent to grandstands for Football Focus with Bob Wilson.
Or Football Preview, was its first call, with Sam Leach, and then Wilson took over in '74.
Now, Sam Leach, he was the one that gave Alan Clark the nickname Sniffer.
You're right. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Sam Leach was a very, very well-respected, moved into television.
Oh, I'm just losing you a bit.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I just lost you a bit then.
Yeah, he hard as nails, Sam Leach, sort of pugnacious Scot, and... so Football Preview, he went head. So On the Ball went head to head with Football Focus, Football Preview, because it was exactly the same model.
Absolutely. On
the Ball was within World of Sport, and Football Focus was within Grandstand. But the big thing, of course, about On the Ball was that they went to great lengths, because Brian Moore would be filmed at the ground where he was going to be commentating that day. They went to ridiculous lengths not to reveal the identity of that ground. This was the paranoia that it would put people off if they saw where he was. Yeah. So every weekend, every On the Ball, every Saturday became a bit of a game around the country about where was Brian Moore. And you get little tiny, so it'd be a very, very tight shot if he was at Stamford Bridge or the Valley or Highbury or White Hart Lane or whatever. It would go to great lengths not to reveal where he was. And as a kid, I never, believe it or not, I never worked out that where Brian Moore was on a Sunday when he gave his post-match report on 5 o'clock or 4:40 as it was then on Saturday afternoon, that was where the main match was coming from the next day on Big Match. I never equated the two. didn't realise. I would now. It's obvious, wasn't it? But my brother, who was 6 years older than me, used to say, "Oh yeah, I know what the main match on the big match is going to be: Arsenal v Birmingham, or Arsenal v Coventry." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "I just do." But that was because he'd seen Brian Moore do. But I never knew as a kid, so it was always a a big moment for me. He says, "Oh, we're going to Upton Park now for West Ham v Derby." As a kid, it was always a really big deal for me. It was really exciting, But the whole thing was exciting. The whole thing for me was really, really exciting. And of course, there's other programs people remember. I know this is about football, but stuff like Thunderbirds was on Sundays, and those kind of things. Particularly, and that's a great ATV production, of course. So all these things, and then we'd have the Persuaders afterwards, or the Protectors, Avenues and Alleyways. That's Tony Christie's song. We'd have the Golden Shot. We'd have the Top 40 countdown. So it was all this kind of sweet. It all started happening for me after lunch on Sunday, when you just had to get through the morning, and then you'd get the great football fix, and you'd get things like the Golden Shot. You get Thunderbirds, even Black Beauty. I used to love the theme tune to Black Beauty. That's what takes me right back. I didn't like the program. I love the theme tune. So yeah, it's kind of a celebration of all that kind of that football, that glorification of football on Sunday afternoons, and an unashamed wallow down in nostalgia to the commentators and the programs and the teams and the players that kind of illuminated our screens, if you like, in that sweet spot, before the Premier League, the years of sticker albums and Scorcher and Score for me, and Shoot magazine, and all that kind of stuff, and League Ladders in Shoot that I'm sure we all grew up with and love. So it's kind of about that, really, Paul. And it's been a hard road to put together. I must admit, it was nearly it took ages, but I'm pretty pleased with it, and I really enjoyed doing it. I've met some fantastic people, and I can't speak highly enough of the families of Brian Moore and Hugh Johns and Margaret Sinstad. Actually, Gerald Sinstad's widow has been wonderfully, wonderfully helpful, and so many people have really, really given me their time and taken me right back. And I was interested in how these programs are put together. So the Big Match team has said it described. And I've gone into that. How was it put together? How did you edit it? How did you decide what games were going to be played? And it was really hard work turning those programs round in time for Sunday afternoon, doing the editing and they called it the goals exchange. It'd be about 8 o'clock every Saturday night. All the regions would have what's called an exchange, where, say, LWT, had their main match, which might be QPR v Burnley, for instance. But they'd seen, okay, well, Arsenal were at Leicester, and it was a 3-3 draw, so we'll take that. We'll take 6 minutes of that, and then we might have a bit. Newcastle beat I don't know, Norwich 3-1, so we'll take a bit of that from Tyne Tees. So this was all going round all the regions. ATV, they might have Birmingham v Liverpool as the main match, but they say, okay, yeah, we'll have a bit of QPR Burnley as our second match, and we'll have a little bit of Newcastle v Norwich as our third match, So, and that was being played out everywhere. So, it's like this network of film being transferred across the region late on a Saturday night as all these different programs are put together. And I found all that fascinating. It might be a bit mechanical, but I love all that stuff,
We were absolutely spoilt, Back in the day, we were spoilt. Now it's so homogenised. If you'd look at Brian Moore, for instance, and you'd kind of try and guess what ground he was at these days, all the grounds look the same.
Yeah, they do, yeah.
All the players playing the same way. The ball, it's the same ball. There's no jeopardy. The pitches are all the same.
No,
everything. The kits are almost the same. There was iconic kits. Crystal Palace's kit, iconic.
And you've hit the nail on the head.
Iconic, different.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Kits, great great badges.
Yep.
And that's all. That's all included in this. All those things. Exactly right, Paul. Those little things that might be lost in the sands of time. Those great kits of, as you say, Palace, Norwich, that wonderful, yellow and green, looking great on these newly bought coloured TVs. The black and white of Newcastle, That's probably sacrilege to a Birmingham fan, but the claret and blue of Aston Villa, and
Absolutely.
all these, and the great Coventry kits, the light blue, Man City blue v Man City v Man United, light blue, light red. I know they're still there, but there was something purer about the kits,
The Admiral kit,
and the badges.
the Admiral
Admiral
kit, the
yeah.
Coventry,
Don't
the Man
start me.
United, and
Don't start me.
it was everything was just pioneering, groundbreaking, different, independent, everything that you would want. A footballer would do something, you'd be mesmerised, you'd take your ball out on the playground or over the fields or the pitches or wherever, you'd put your jumpers down for goalposts. We didn't go on our PlayStation. We never had a PlayStation.
No, exactly.
We had a proper Wembley trophy or a
as soon as it was
Kaiser.
over, it was Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was get the ball out, get your boots on, get out wherever you could. Let's replicate the goal we've just seen John Toshak score at Anfield, or whatever.
Yeah.
And we say we were spoiled though. It's interesting because you think in some ways, Paul, we were watching what we were given when we were given it, but we still loved it. And I think the sparsity of the material made it more special. Now we could watch. You'd probably watch 5 or 6 games a day if you wanted to around the world. Yeah. Then it was sparse. It was very rare, and so we enjoyed it. We lapped it up. That's why you had to be in front of the telly at 2:00 on a Sunday. As you missed it. Remember, we didn't have video recorders until 79, 80. No. So if you missed it, that was it. It's gone. You're not going to see it. So you made damn sure you were in front of that telly and watching the game, and it made stars of all these players, didn't it? And it was great. And we're sounding like what we are, aren't we? Middle-aged, nostalgic men.
As Paul Fletcher would say, we sound like a pair of old farts, and we are. But I'll go back.
Proud to be.
Absolutely, we lived through an age where the players were one of us. They'd go to the game on a bus or, park their car next to or live in the same street. Not like nowadays. No, they're like pop stars.
They live behind gated mansions. You can't, on private drives we can't even get down. Different times. I also talked about, even things like the adverts that were on in those days. We had to sit through the adverts, but everyone knew the adverts in this, like the Milk Tray, Double Diamonds, Worthington E, Benson Hedges, all part of it, all part of that Sunday experience, all part of the kind of nostalgic roller coaster, if you like. And it's really, really hard to recreate that with words, but I've had a go.
Be at home means Davenport's. That was our number one advert during Star Soccer.
Yeah, because it was all the adverts that were directed to men. Wasn't
absolutely,
it?
But you could have your beer at home because it was before. I mean, we used to have the big. What were they called? They were almost like little kegs, wasn't they?
Oh, Watney Party Sevens.
Yeah,
Watney Party Sevens. Yeah. But you had to pierce them at the top.
That's right. Yeah.
And, they were impossible to pour, weren't they?
Yeah, and then you'd have like your Davenports. You'd go to the off license round the side of the pub, and you'd have a fill up, and you'd take your Davenports home and watch Star Soccer.
Oh no, it's happy days, isn't it?
I just think
it really is.
It's a romance that the kids don't get today. Almost like
there was a romance.
Yeah,
exactly. That's a good word to use. It is romance, and that's what I was trying to. It was a romantic element to this. Might seem an odd word, but I think it's actually the right word. Romantic kind of nostalgia of all this kind of. As I say, some sweet spot in our memories, our collective memories that we treasure, and we wouldn't have eradicated if our life depended on it. They're very, very special, and everybody's got a different memory of these programs. Everybody's got a unique experience about how they used to watch. The version in Time Tees was called Shoot. How they shoot, or the kick-off match in Granada, or Star Soccer in 80 Real, the big match. Everyone's got their own memories, every routine they used to have. I remember my dad used to wash the car on a Sunday, and he'd come in, and after dinner he'd want us to help with washing up, but we'd go and watch the football. And all these kind of people have got everyone's got a memory. Everyone's got a memory of their own personal experience of enjoying these programs, and there's a kind of innocence about it, and but something glorious about it as well. So that's kind of what I was trying to capture, I think, with this book, which, as I say, is the first of several. So I ain't finished yet.
So this first one, Brian Moore Saved Our Sundays,
Yeah.
which is looking at regionalised TV programmes. That's the first one. That's coming out 20th of May, isn't it?
20th or 24th, is it 20th of May? Yeah, certainly about that time. Yeah,
And
May,
it's published by the wonderful publishers, Pitch
Yeah.
Publishing. Did
Yeah.
Duncan come up with the artwork for your front cover?
Yeah, Duncan Olner.
He's brilliant,
Yes,
isn't
he did. Yeah, that very.
He's a genius.
Yeah, no,
you know.
I really like that.
Did you get much time talking to Duncan? I'd love to do a podcast with Duncan. I think I look at so many of Pitch Publishing, and I think Duncan's an absolute genius. The way he just gets that front cover, and you just go, "That's just genius." That is a genius front cover.
And we haven't even mentioned Cluffy, have we? Because the cover of Brian Moore Save Our Sundays has got Morrow talking to Brian Clough. Got the two Brians, and that's very much kind of puts it right in that period, you know, because Cloughie, of course, was massive.
Oh, yeah.
You know, to going from Hartlepool to Derby, and it's very much in that period. He was like everywhere in like the early 70s, and Gary Newborn will tell a great story about he was the only person he knew that could stop her, because in those days every club had a really big social, really busy, vibrant social club that was packed before games. I'm sure Birmingham might have had one, you know. And he said Cloughie was the only person he knew that when he came on the box, he could silence an entire room, that people would stop drinking their pints or smoking their fags and have a look at the box, because he could do that. Cloughie had that kind of ability, if you like. So he's kind of all over the book as well, the kind of controversies that he got involved in. And so yeah, I mean, it was I hope people enjoy the book. I mean, it's as much as I enjoyed writing it, because it was, as I say, it's a bit of a cliche, but it was a real labour of love, and one that I think my wife would be glad to see the back of it, because she hasn't seen me for about 6 months. But she said, "Are we still writing? Are you writing about football again?" Yeah, sorry. I said, "Why are you She goes, "Why are you watching York City v Southampton from 1971?" And it's not an easy one to answer, I have to say. But, you know, I just am, you know.
But you talk about Brian Clough there. The managers were bigger Mavericks than the Mavericks at times. We got Malcolm Allison, we got Big Ron, who come a little bit later. But you know, we had so many. Bill Shankly, of course, and
Shanks. We had Tommy Docherty,
Matt Busby,
Docherty. Yeah, we had. I mean,
and they stayed around, didn't they? You know, your club would have the same manager throughout the decade. I mean, now they'll have 3 or 4 managers in a season.
That's right. I mean, you had Freddie Goodwin at Birmingham, you had Tony Waddington at Stoke. You know,
legend, what the God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jimmy
and,
Bloomfield
at Coventry,
Bloomfield
Leicester. At Leicester, yeah. Managers like John Bond, you know, went from Bournemouth to Norwich, you know, did great. And of course, Bobby Robson, you can't sort of forget the things he did at Ipswich. Yes, indeed. And of course, we mentioned Malcolm Allison. Malcolm Allison was involved in one of the great moments on the big match, a massive great row with Alan Mullery just after the 1970 World Cup. Allison and Mullery had a proper spat on telly, with Jimmy Hill sort of refereeing. I don't think you get nowadays. It's there's a rawness and an honesty. Everyone's tiptoeing around each other. Then they were just going for it, you know, and it was really refreshing. And again, that's the sort of thing that ITV did. They wanted that edge. They wanted that edginess to its programmes at the BBC. The BBC was always very safe. I'd never not Match of the Day, because it's an icon. It's an iconic programme in its own right, and it's a fantastic programme. But it wasn't edgy. It was very, very highly produced and brilliant, with great commentators. I mean, I got to know Barry Davis really well. Barry Davis, what a fantastic guy he is. And John Motson, before he died, they're great commentators. And it was a great programme. But it perhaps didn't have the edge of ITV, which pushed the envelope out a little bit more.
Did you cover the Alan Mullery when he was mic'd up in 1982?
I haven't got to that yet, but I will be. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I'll be doing that. That'll be in a subsequent volume. Don't worry. No, I've got. See, the thing is, Paul, there's so much
yeah.
material out there that I could probably do 10 books. I mean, I won't because probably people get sick of it. But there's so much material out there, and I certainly will be doing Mullery being mic'd up in a subsequent edition. But the Mullery Allison spat was a memorable moment on the big match. The two of them were just like just really going for it, and it was all televised and it was great. And the LWC loved all that kind of stuff. They loved controversy, not for the sake of it, but they knew that's what the viewers wanted. They knew that football created stories, and it wasn't just about watching 20 minutes highlights. There were offshoots, there were things to discuss, and their view was they wanted to know what are people going to be talking about in the classrooms, and factories and pubs tomorrow, because we want that on our programme. It's a bit like the approach taken by Talk Sport today. Don't always get it right, but they understood that the talking points that people want. They will be talking. Did you see that great goal by Stan Bowles? Did you see that fantastic overhead kick by Frank Worthington? All that kind of stuff. And they played on that, and they did it very well, I think.
But going back to Mullery and Malcolm Allison, that was an overspill from the 1970 World Cup, and Malcolm Allison was quite critical about one of Mullery's performances in that World Cup, wasn't it? So it spilled over, and they invited them both because they knew what was going to happen. Mullery's no shrinking violet, and Big Mal, I mean, like Fedora and the cigar. I mean, he was a larger than life character. So they knew fireworks. It was just get him in the studio.
They didn't disappoint, did they? And it was like basically, Allison was saying, I don't think you're a world-class player. You're not as good as the likes of, Overlay. He said you're not as good as Moore or Ball or Bell. Yeah. And Mallory said, I'm quicker. I'm quicker than Bally. All this kind of, so it was a very much it almost felt you were kind of almost like spying on a sort of row between two people, but it was televised for the. So that was great. So another moment. I played that in full. Actually, I transcribed that quite because it was such dynamite television that I thought that warranted kind of quite a big bit of coverage. So, but Malcolm Allison, as you say, what a huge character he was, and he again made for television. The fedora, the big sheepskin, the big furry coat, the big cigar. And he made his name really on that 70 World Cup panel with Derek Dougan and Bob McNabb and et cetera, which was, took the whole concept of a panel, dragged it into the modern age, really, and that's the template for the kind of modern panel that we still see to this day, really. It wouldn't have happened. But that was all LWT. That was all, I think that was the idea of John Bromley and John Bromley was head of sport at ITV, and Jimmy Hill. That was their idea, get these big characters on telly talking about the game. And it was brilliant. It worked fantastically. And I have to say, Brian Moore orchestrated that panel brilliantly because he was almost like a kind of referee, arbiter, but he let him just give him enough flexibility or space to really say what they wanted to. But he didn't let it spill over. And again, that was a mark of him as a great broadcaster and journalist, actually.
Absolutely. So you've got this first book coming out. When are the follow-up books going to be coming out, Matt?
I'm sorry, Paul. I just lost you there.
When are the other books going to be coming out? So this one, first one comes out May.
In May, yeah. To be decided, Paul. I need a bit of a rest now.
Got ya.
But I will be doing it. Basically when I write it is the answer to that. So I can't give you an answer, but don't worry, I'll let you know as soon as I have. So the second half of the decade, again, a whole new set of players come in. Your Hoddles and your who else was in that second period? I mean, the great Nottingham Forest side, of course. Villa and Liverpool's ascendancy. To the top, the likes of Keegan really becoming great player. We've got the Argentinian angle arrives in 78 with Ardiles and Villa. So you got all these kind of things happening in the 70s. International players start to come, and TV loved all these kind of things, And and one of the players I really enjoy watching is remembering just what a great striker Malcolm McDonald was actually when he first
Legend.
came to Newcastle.
Yeah.
What a player old Malcolm was, and great TV because he was actually quite eloquent and articulate. He didn't. He'd say what he thought. He said, "Well, we're gonna thrash Liverpool in the FA Cup final in 1974," and of course they didn't.
Actually didn't say that.
No, he didn't. I was
No,
paraphrasing.
I know, but he worked for the Sun, didn't he?
That's
Malcolm.
right. You're absolutely right.
And it was a ghost written with one of the hacks up there. But Liverpool and the media copped hold of this and
you're right.
really turned it into something that Malcolm actually never said. In fact,
no, you're right.
Malcolm
You're right.
is probably the only footballer that turned up at the new ground in his signing on fee, which is a great story that Malcolm told me. When he transferred from Luton, he was driven up in a Rolls Royce, and when he's
fantastic.
When his turn, the fella, I think he was a director or a friend of a director at Luton Town, and he's driven him up, and they pulled over, and they says, "Right, you get in the back now. You get in the back, Malcolm." And then he was to come out, got his hat on, and he opened it up. Malcolm come out and to be greeted by the press, and his mate, who was one of the journalists up there, said, "This is the only player that's ever turned up in his signing on fee." They thought it was Malcolm's Rolls Royce. But again,
brilliant.
I mean, what and he always went to sleep, before a game of football.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, just that great home debut, that hat trick he got against Liverpool in one of his early games in September '71.
Yeah,
what a fantastic bit of TV that, and great goals by McDonald, and of course in that '74 Cup run, he was on fire. He didn't turn up for the final.
Scored in every game. Every round.
Yeah, those two great goals against Burnley in the semi-final. It was fantastic player. So, those players, it's been, and Rodney Marsh, particularly in his early days at QPR, I didn't do it so much for Man City, but some of the goals he used to score in those early days, in the late 60s, early 70s. Again, another player that the big match, when it was in black and white, actually, made a star of people like that. Martin Peters, some of those goals he got at West Ham, I mean, just brilliant. And the atmosphere you can hear on those coming out of the stadiums, because the mics were always quite loud. I love it all that. I love it. And I think we'll never get it back. We'll never get those.
No, it's gone.
Never get these days back.
No.
They're gone. But we cherish them. And that's and we have to retain them. And that's kind of where I'm coming from on these.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to purchasing your book. Other people that want to purchase the book, what's the easiest way for them to hook up with you and buy your book ultimately?
Well, I mean, Amazon or Food Pitch website.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the two ones, and it's going to be, I'm told it's going to be in all the shops as well. So, Waterstones, WH Smith, and other good booksellers, as they say. But all the usual locations. Paul, the book will be available, and I hope it will be enjoyed by people. That will be that's my desire. It's not a thing. I don't think it's not about being successful and selling millions, but if it brings joy to a few people, then I'll be really pleased.
It's certainly going to bring joy to me. You've brought joy to me in this podcast. Can I thank you so much for your time, Matt?
I appreciate it very much.
You can, I'm guessing, pre-order now, because Pitch usually do a pre-order, so you can pay your money up front, get it into the top 10, get it being talked about as well, because I think it's going to be a bestseller, one of the best-selling books of 2024, and I'm already looking forward to part 2, Matt. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
And your Facebook and Twitter accounts before you leave me, because people are going to say, Paul, how can we link up with Matt now? Can we just say thanks for writing this book? It's the retro market. I think is a great market.
I agree.
And I think there's so many of us older guys that love to look back and read all these various publications.
Absolutely. Well, just Matt Eastley on Facebook. Be my guest to join up. And a rather strange, I called ME Vinyl Revival on Twitter. ME Vinyl Revival. That's another great love of my life is music and collected vinyl records. So ME Vinyl Revival. You'll find me on X, as I think we call it now.
Yeah, I do, yeah. I don't know what that's all about. I still call it
No,
Twitter.
I don't either, but I think everyone still calls it Twitter, don't they? But hopefully people will find me on there. So feel free to hook up and follow me, and I'll follow you back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time again,
My pleasure.
Matt.
No problem at all.
Pass on our best wishes to all at Pitch. Keep on publishing fantastic publications so we can read all about those halcyon days of the golden age of football. Cheers,
Perfect.
mate. Lovely.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
Thank
pal.
you.
Bye-bye, and thanks for
Bye.
listening, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Matt. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. Ad-free listening is available on Amazon Music for all the music plus top podcasts included.